Have you ever wondered why the more righteous you are, the more pain you seem to carry? Why the kinder you become, the more replaceable you feel? You're not lazy. You're not wrong. You're just playing a game where the rewards don't go to the good. They go to those who understand the rules. Since childhood, you've been taught to be good, to follow your conscience, to stay inside the lines of morality. But have you ever stopped to ask, whose conscience is it, really? And who benefits when you stay obedient? Machiavelli didn't reject morality. He simply saw it for what it is. A tool, not a compass. And conscience, if left unexamined, becomes a double-edged sword, a silent weapon that turns inward. Socrates lived with integrity and died for it. Abraham Lincoln held on to principle and left a nation bleeding. They didn't choose the easy path. They chose not to betray themselves. But they also knew kindness cannot be blind, and righteousness cannot be absolute. You live by your conscience. But the real question is it leading you toward freedom or back into a golden cage someone else built for you? Maybe you're thinking, if everyone lived like Machiavelli, wouldn't the world become cold and chaotic? Isn't conscience what separates us from animals? Surely we need morality to live in peace. That's a natural reaction, and one Machiavelli anticipated. He never denied morality. He simply warned, don't turn it into your cage. Every society defines what's good and evil, but those definitions don't come from truth. They come from power. Power decides what's righteous. And if you live to please someone else's version of morality, you become their tool. While still thinking you're a good person, think of those punished for defying the norms of their time. Martin Luther, branded a heretic. Galileo, condemned for saying the earth moves. Mandela, imprisoned for challenging the morality of apartheid. They all followed a conscience that society rejected. If they'd chosen the easier path, silence, compliance, niceness, history would have forgotten them. It's easy to be good. It's much harder to be principled, and even harder to stay principled when the world tells you you're wrong. Being good is comfortable. Being conscious is lonely. And Machiavelli knew, if you don't define your own conscience, someone else will define it for you. Fairy tales tell us, never hurt the animal that helps you. In every culture, every century, this rule holds true. You can lie to the king, betray the villain, even cheat death, but harm the helpful animal, and your story ends in ruin. Marie-Louise von Franz called it the one moral truth that all fairy tales agree on. And she was right, because that animal is never just an animal. It's your inner compass, your gut feeling, your silent sense of what's right and what's wrong. It shows up when no one else does. It whispers when the crowd is screaming. It nudges you when something's off. Long before your brain catches up, Carl Jung called it the conscience. Machiavelli would call it something else. A strategic advisor, not a master, not a god, not a voice to be worshipped blindly, but a tool to be sharpened and sometimes questioned. Because here's the truth. Not every inner voice is holy. Not every gut feeling leads you to victory. And not every conscience deserves your loyalty. Some voices inside you were put there by guilt, by religion, by fear of judgment, by years of being told that nice means good, and obedient means moral. But Machiavelli was never interested in being obedient. He wanted to win. He didn't say, kill the animal. He said, observe it, study it, then train it to serve you. That's the cold strategy most people never learn. Because here's the twist. The voice inside you can be trained, not suppressed, not ignored, but disciplined, like a loyal hound. Your conscience can be taught to distinguish between real danger and false alarms, between emotional reactivity and true instinct, between inherited guilt and personal clarity. But if you never question that voice, if you treat it like a divine command, you risk following the barking of a dog that someone else raised. You'll do what feels right, even when it's sabotaging your future. You'll avoid what feels wrong, even when it's your only path to power. That's why fairy tales don't just say, trust the animal. They say, don't harm it. Because if you reject your inner guide completely, you become reckless, reactive, a danger to yourself. But if you follow it blindly, you become naive, manipulable, a danger to your potential. Real power comes not from killing your inner voice, nor from worshipping it, but from taming it. And that requires something most people fear: silence, discomfort, uncertainty, the time between stimulus and response, that quiet space where strategy is born. The strong don't act on impulse. They observe, they test, they let the animal inside them speak. But they do not obey it without question, because a true strategist doesn't ask, is this right or wrong? He asks, will this move bring me closer to my purpose or farther away? Machiavelli never taught you to be immoral. He taught you to stop being predictable, to stop letting guilt choose your future, to stop assuming your conscience is always on your side. Because sometimes the most dangerous trap is the voice that sounds the most familiar. You're taught to follow your conscience, but no one tells you what to do when that conscience clashes with everything and everyone around you. What do you choose? Your inner voice, or the voices of those you love? Your gut feeling, or the judgment of your family, your peers, your society? Most people don't hesitate. They choose the crowd, not because it's right, but because it's safer. Carl Jung said it clearly: obeying your conscience is easy, as long as it agrees with what everyone else wants from you. But the moment your inner voice says something dangerous, something unpopular, something inconvenient, that's when your morality is tested. And most people fail that test. They suppress the voice. They follow the rules. They conform. They stay agreeable. And then they wonder why they feel fake. Because deep down, they know they've betrayed themselves, not for survival, not for strategy, but for comfort. Machiavelli would say, there's no virtue in obedience, only in choosing your own direction, especially when the world points elsewhere. Let's not romanticize conscience. It's not always noble. It doesn't glow in gold. Sometimes it comes as a whisper that says, leave this path. It's killing you. Sometimes it screams, speak now, even if you lose everything. But it rarely speaks loud enough to overpower the applause of the masses. That's why so many people stay in the job they hate, stay in the relationship that's draining them, stay in the identity they've outgrown, because it's easier to wear the mask than to face the discomfort of going against the grain. We are creatures of belonging, social animals, trained to equate rejection with death. So when your conscience puts you in conflict with your tribe, you feel like you're dying, even if what you're doing is finally, truly right. But Machiavelli would argue, a man who fears being alone with his own mind will always be ruled by others. That's the pattern most people never break. They follow the herd, convincing themselves they're following their heart. But there's a difference between what feels good and what feels honest. Sometimes the truth hurts. Sometimes the right decision burns bridges. Sometimes the path of integrity is the loneliest one. And yet, it's the only path that ever leads to freedom. The real tragedy isn't that people lie to each other. It's that they lie to themselves. They cloak their fear in morality, their cowardice in kindness, their conformity in conscience. They say, I had no choice. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just did what was expected of me. But Machiavelli would ask, at what cost? Because the longer you betray yourself, for the sake of others' approval, the keener your true voice becomes, until one day, you can't even hear it anymore. and you become a stranger in your own life. That's not virtue, that's self-erasure, and no reward from society is worth losing the ability to trust yourself. You were told, do the right thing, follow your conscience, be good, be honest, be kind, no matter what. But Machiavelli would ask, says who? Who defined what's right? Who told you what kindness means? Who made you believe that honesty is always the highest virtue? Because here's what no one teaches you. Not every conscience is yours. Some are borrowed, some are inherited, and some were installed in you by people who benefited from your obedience. You call it conscience, but is it really? Or is it programming? There's a reason why fairy tales are full of contradictions. Some say, face evil. Others say, run from it. Some say, tell the truth, even to the devil. Others say, lie your way out. Marie-Louise von Franz called it the rule of contradiction. No single moral lesson is universally true. And that's not a flaw. That's the design. Because life isn't a script. It's a battlefield, and your survival depends on recognizing when to abandon the rules they gave you and write your own. This is the inversion move, turning the moral code inside out and asking the one forbidden question, does this still serve me? You were taught to forgive everyone, even when they've never apologized. You were taught to give second chances, even to those who used the first one to harm you. You were taught to stay silent, because speaking your truth might make others uncomfortable. And you call that maturity, but Machiavelli would call it strategic suicide. Because if you obey a moral code that keeps you small, that keeps you weak, that keeps you quiet, you are not virtuous. You are controlled. There is no nobility in dying for a belief. You never chose for yourself. Real conscience begins, not when you follow a rule, but when you dare to question who wrote it. It begins the moment you realize that doing the right thing often means sacrificing your peace, your potential, your power, for people who wouldn't do the same for you. And that's when something shifts. You stop asking, is this moral? You start asking, is this mine? Because morality without sovereignty is submission in disguise. And here's the cruel truth. Many people will cheer you on, as long as your conscience keeps you predictable, harmless, and easy to manage. But the second you invert the script, the second you say, no, this rule doesn't serve me anymore, they will call you selfish. They will call you arrogant. They will call you dangerous. But Machiavelli would call you awake. He would tell you, the only thing more dangerous than evil is unquestioned goodness, the kind that sacrifices itself to maintain the illusion of virtue, the kind that never asks, who benefits from my suffering? So maybe, just maybe, the greatest act of integrity is the one where you finally disobey. The conscience that was never yours to begin with. When your conscience speaks, most people feel the urge to respond immediately. To fix, to explain, to apologize, to act. But Machiavelli would say, the moment you rush, you lose. Carl Jung warned of the same danger. All haste is of the devil, he said, and he wasn't being poetic. He was being strategic, because hasty action doesn't come from strength. It comes from fear, from anxiety, from guilt that hasn't been examined, only obeyed. That's why the most powerful people are often the quietest in the room. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned something rare. Impulse is not intuition, and noise is not clarity. There's a silence that feels like confusion, and there's a silence that feels like command. Most people panic in silence. They reach for answers. They demand quick resolutions. They need to feel like they're being good again, like they've restored balance by doing what's expected. But the Machiavellian mind doesn't rush to be righteous. It waits. It watches. It listens. Not not just to the voices outside, but to the war inside. Because here's what Jung and von Franz understood. The conscience speaks in contradictions. The deeper the dilemma, the more unclear the answer. And that's not a sign you're broken. It's a sign you've reached real choice. Von Franz wrote, "If one stews long enough in the agonies of such a conflict, an inner line becomes clear." That's not just psychological advice. That's tactical genius. Because silence isn't just absence of sound. It's a sharpening of perception. It's a strategy. It's a crucible. It burns away guilt that doesn't belong to you. It reveals which parts of your conscience are yours, and which were implanted, but only if you stay in the fire. Most people escape too soon. They act just to feel clean again, to relieve the pressure, to get applause for doing the right thing. But the Machiavellian waits until the right thing is no longer based on approval, but on clarity. They know silence makes manipulators nervous. It makes guilt unravel. It makes lies echo louder. It forces every voice in your head to reveal its agenda. And eventually, one voice will rise, not the loudest, but the calmest, not the one full of shame, but the one full of direction. That's your real conscience. Not the reflex, not the programming, not the rule book, but the signal buried underneath, all the noise you've inherited. You don't find that voice in action. You find it in the pause, in the space between stimulus and response. And when you hear it, you'll know, not because it pleases everyone, not because it feels safe, but because it doesn't shake. It just is. Machiavelli would never trust a man who always reacts, but he would respect the one who waits until even his silence becomes a weapon. You followed the rules. You did everything right. You were kind, respectful, careful, humble. You sacrificed. You said sorry, even when you weren't at fault. You chose peace, even when it broke you inside. And still, you're miserable. Why? Because morality isn't the same as meaning. Because approval isn't the same as fulfillment. Because being accepted by the world often requires rejecting yourself. And you did it, over and over, quietly, politely, with a smile. You betrayed your instincts. You silenced your inner voice. You told yourself, this is the right thing to do. But Machiavelli would say, you didn't do the right thing. You did the expected thing, and the difference is your suffering. Society teaches you how to be liked, not how to be free. It rewards you for being predictable, not powerful. It praises your goodness, as long as it doesn't threaten the order. But real integrity doesn't always look good. It doesn't always come wrapped in kindness. Sometimes it burns bridges. Sometimes it disappoints people. Sometimes it offends. And that's why most people never do it. Because they'd rather be liked than real. They'd rather be admired than awake. They'd rather feel safe than feel honest. But here's what they never tell you. Being a good person doesn't protect you. It just makes you easier to use. People will applaud your selflessness as long as it serves them. They'll admire your morality as long as it doesn't inconvenience them. They'll call you noble right before they take advantage of you again. That's why you feel exhausted. Not because you lack virtue, but because your virtue has been weaponized against you. Carl Jung said, observing customs and laws can be a cloak for a lie. So subtle, we even deceive ourselves. He was right. But Machiavelli would go further. He'd say, sometimes the greatest lie you tell is the one that sounds most virtuous. The lie that says, I'm fine. I'm happy to help. It's okay. I don't mind. When deep down, you're boiling, resentful, invisible. Because goodness, when it's forced, is just a performance. And when you play that role long enough, you lose the ability to recognize your real self. So what's the point? Why keep obeying a conscience that was never truly yours? Why keep playing a part that leaves you hollow? Machiavelli would say, the purpose of life is not to be righteous. It's to be sovereign, and sovereignty begins the moment you stop asking, will they still approve of me? And start asking, do I still approve of myself? Most people will never get there, because that kind of honesty comes with a cost. But so does the lie you're living, and at some point, you'll have to choose validation or liberation. Because the truth is, you're not unhappy because you're immoral. You're unhappy because you keep trading your peace for someone else's approval, and that trade will never be worth it. You think it's not a big deal. So what if you stayed silent one more time? So what if you went along to avoid conflict? So what if you did something you didn't believe in, just to keep the peace? You tell yourself it's maturity, compromise, emotional intelligence. But inside, something breaks. Quietly, permanently. A tiny fracture in the foundation of who you are. And it doesn't heal, because that fracture grows every time you betray yourself in the name of being a good person. Carl Jung called it a voice whispering, there's something not right. No matter how perfect you look on the outside, no matter how much applause you get from the crowd, that voice doesn't scream. It lingers in the pauses, in the anxiety you can't explain, in the burnout that doesn't go away, in the deep sense of being a stranger inside your own skin. Fyodor Dostoevsky said it best. If we disobey our conscience for too long, we suffer immensely. Not from punishment, not from guilt, but from erosion, a slow rot of the soul. And it's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's subtle. You become numb, detached, empty. You smile because you should. You show up because you must. But you're not there, because the real you, the one who once dreamed, demanded, desired, has been buried under layer after layer of performance. You traded authenticity for approval, truth for peacekeeping, fire for safety, and now you wonder where your spark went. This is the collapse no one talks about. Not breakdown, but slow-motion betrayal. Not crisis, but chronic self-abandonment. The kind that doesn't make headlines, but eats people alive. And the worst part, you can't even blame anyone, because you said yes. You smiled. You agreed. You kept the peace. You played your part, even when your whole being was begging you to stop. Machiavelli would never have allowed that, not because he was heartless, but because he understood this truth. There is no virtue in becoming a ghost, just to make others comfortable. He knew that silence, if chosen, can be power, but silence, when forced, becomes suffocation. He knew that kindness, when strategic, is strength, but kindness, when compulsive, is submission. And he knew that the world will never tell you when you've given too much, because it will always want more. So you must be the one to draw the line, to say, enough. No, this isn't who I am anymore. Not with anger, not with ego, but with clarity, because no amount of external harmony is worth the internal war you'll have to fight for the rest of your life. And when that war becomes too quiet to feel, that's when you've lost, not to them, to yourself. So if you felt the collapse, if you've looked in the mirror and seen someone you no longer recognize, then maybe it's time to stop asking, how can I fix myself to fit in? And start asking, what part of me did I have to kill just to be loved? Here's a brutal truth. Conscience has no power if it only leads you to sacrifice. Machiavelli never denied the existence of a conscience. He simply refused to serve one he hadn't examined, because not all consciences are pure. Some are twisted, exaggerated, conditioned to feel guilt for clarity, shame for independence, fear for setting boundaries. Carl Jung warned of this. He spoke of the false conscience, the voice that feels just like the real one, but serves the enemy. Not yours, theirs. It whispers, "You're selfish, you're cruel, you're dangerous for speaking up." And so you comply. You silence yourself. You surrender power, under the illusion that you're doing what's right. That's not virtue. That's programming. Jung said, beside the right conscience stands the false one, the devil, the seducer, the tempter in disguise. Machiavelli would take it further. He'd say, every power structure is built on manipulating that confusion, because a person who can't tell truth from guilt will always be easy to manage. The most effective prisons don't have bars. They have belief systems. Beliefs like, speaking out is wrong, walking away is betrayal, self-respect is selfish, power is evil. Who benefits from those beliefs? Not you. So Machiavelli offers a new law, a cold law, a strategic law. Never obey a conscience you haven't interrogated. Never worship a voice you haven't tested under fire, because power doesn't grow where guilt lives. It grows in clarity, in decisions made not from compulsion, but from control. And clarity doesn't come from rushing. It comes from conflict, from facing the voices inside you and asking, which of you serves me? And which of you serves the version of me that others prefer? Jung warned that you must stew in the agonies of inner conflict to reach that clarity. Machiavelli would call that necessary suffering, the kind of suffering that separates the ruled from the ruler, the follower from the strategist. Because here's the law no one teaches. Power is not the absence of conscience. It's the mastery of it, to feel the full weight of morality and still choose what must be done, to hear the scream of guilt and still move forward because the outcome demands it. That's not heartlessness. That's discipline. Because in the end, power doesn't ask, does this feel good? It asks, will this create the result? That's the Machiavellian shift, from moral reaction to conscious command. And once you make it, once you stop obeying the most convincing voice in the room and start questioning its origin, you become untouchable, not because you have no conscience, but because you no longer let guilt wear the crown. You've spent years trying to be the good one, the one who understood, who compromised, who forgave, who kept the peace, even when the war was inside you. And maybe it worked. For a while, people liked you. You were admired, respected, safe. But deep down, you were never truly seen. Because to be loved by everyone requires you to carve yourself into pieces until what's left is a version of you that fits, but never fully lives. And now you're here, exhausted, questioning, waking up to the quiet realization that something vital has been lost. Not your image, not your success, but your edge. That raw, silent power that comes from knowing, this is who I am, and I answer to no one but myself. You buried that to keep others comfortable. You silenced it so they wouldn't call you difficult, selfish, arrogant. But Machiavelli would ask, what's the point of being remembered as agreeable if you're unknown to yourself? Because legacy, real legacy, is not built on likability. It's built on conviction, on saying no when the world demands yes, on standing still while others rush to belong, on doing what's necessary, not what's expected. Do you think history remembers those who stayed polite? It remembers the disruptors, the misfits, the ones who made people uncomfortable because they refused to betray themselves. Socrates drank poison, but didn't apologize. Joan of Arc was burned, but never recanted. Malcolm X was shot, but never softened. They didn't ask to be admired. They demanded to be heard. And long after the applause dies, and the crowd forgets your name, what will remain? Your compliance or your clarity? Because the world rewards comfort in the moment, but only remembers those who chose courage in the face of it. So you have to choose. Will you die with a spotless reputation or a soul that never bowed? Will your legacy be that you were kind or that you were unshakable? Will they say, you were always so nice? Or will they say, you made me rethink everything? Machiavelli understood. The man who shapes history doesn't follow the rules of the moment. He follows the voice that echoes beyond it. And sometimes that voice asks you to be misunderstood, to be feared, to walk alone, but it never asks you to shrink. So what do you want to be known for? Not in this hour, not in this year, but when your name is spoken, in rooms you'll never enter. Do you want to be remembered for how well you played the game, or for how boldly you rewrote it? Because in the end, the applause always fades, but the echo of one clear, untamed decision that never dies. You were trained to obey your conscience without ever being taught to question where it came from. But Machiavelli would ask, was that voice born from your soul or installed by someone who needed you soft? That's the final cut, because obedience dressed as virtue is still slavery. And if your conscience is just a reflection of what the world demands from you, then you've never actually lived. You've just complied. So stop asking, what would a good person do? Start asking, what would a free person do? Because freedom isn't loud. It doesn't beg to be validated. It doesn't check for applause. It moves in silence, clear, sharp, and unshakable. And when that moment comes, when your voice trembles, your heart races, and every part of you wants to retreat, that's when you know you're finally not living for them anymore. You're living for something higher. Not morality, not reputation, but clarity. So here's your final choice. You can stay where it's safe, liked, useful, invisible, or you can step into the cold, where few walk, where truth burns, where history is made. You already know what the world wants you to do. Now ask yourself, what does your real voice want? And this time, don't ignore it.